Welcome to the Daily Insider here on VegasInsider.com. I am Kevin Rogers for Wednesday, February 24th, 2021, and a very busy night in the NBA and college basketball to look forward to, and also we'll look back at Tuesday. Before we get to all of that, let's first take a look at the homepage here at VegasInsider.com, and you have some soccer action this afternoon with the UEFA Champions League continuing the round of 16, and the matchups today, as you can check out from our friend Toby Maxstone Smith, a couple matchups, Real Madrid in action, also Man City in action, and you can look at those predictions here. And Toby actually won both of his predictions on Tuesday, so you can check out the entire article at VegasInsider.com on our homepage for today's soccer action starting at 3 p.m. Eastern. Also, NHL, some Wednesday best bets from Matt Blunt as he takes a look at Flyers and Rangers. Also, Kings and Blues. LA's been on fire of late. And a couple of predictions there, an analysis for the NHL tonight. So you can find those on our homepage. You see right here the Champions League best bets and also Wednesday's best bets inside the NHL, and also for golf with the WGC Workday Championship picks. And that's coming up in Bradenton right outside of Tampa, and that starts on Thursday. And plenty of good analysis here with Dustin Johnson as the favorite, but also we'll keep an eye on Bryson DeChambeau as well. And here are some of the predictions that you can look at VegasInsider.com. And, of course, not only the golf world, but the sports world, keeping an eye on Tiger Woods. And at least looks like he'll be okay. So he'll have he had some surgery on his legs yesterday following that car accident in L.A. But thankfully, at least Tiger, he should be okay and recover soon enough. Now let's take a look at NBA from last night. And before we get to tonight's busy card, and we'll start off with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And congratulations if you took the points with the Cleveland Cavaliers, even if you moneylined them, as they won at the end against Atlanta 112-111. They had a wide open dunk, and they end up winning that game. A back and forth one. The Cavs were up early. The Hawks came back, took the lead. Hawks were never really in line to cover that game, and I talked about it yesterday. I didn't really trust Atlanta laying that kind of points. Also, I didn't recommend taking Cleveland either, considering they were on a 10-game losing streak and they were 0-13 against the spread in their last 13 games. So it's hard even to take them as an 8-point underdog at home. But Cleveland ends up beating Atlanta, and the Hawks, they've had issues this year on the road. And when you look at, or I should say as a road favorite at least, they did win early at Chicago. And it's amazing how the tables have turned where the Bulls are playing a lot better than the Hawks right now, how long ago that was. But lost outright at Charlotte. They did win this game at Minnesota, did beat Washington, but also lost at the Knicks, lost at Cleveland. And this Hawks team just really failing to find consistency after a 4-1 start. And that Southeast Division, which is wide open right now, where the Heat are playing a little bit better, but they're not running away with it. Charlotte's been up and down. Orlando's got a bunch of injuries. Washington's playing better. But Atlanta, you would think they would try to take advantage. But some of the losses they've had, twice to the Knicks, losing twice to Cleveland, that you kind of wonder what's going on with them. I know they're not good defensively, but still, that's a game you can't lose. Detroit wins at Orlando 105-93. They get some revenge for that Sunday night loss. So they split the two games there against the Magic. Both games stay way under the total. And Orlando had a nice little winning streak. When I say little, it was only 3 games. But they end up winning these 3 against the Knicks, Warriors, and Pistons, then losing to Detroit on the back end of that 2-game set. Now Orlando goes to Brooklyn, and then it won't get any easier. You get Utah coming in, and Dallas, and even Atlanta won't be easy, but Orlando, a beat-up team right now. Golden State finally gets over the hump on this road trip. They hold off the Knicks 114-106. Steph Curry played well again last night. Again, this Golden State team, they led by 13 on Orlando late, lost. They led in the fourth quarter at Charlotte, lost with that crazy ending with Draymond getting thrown out and Terry Rozier hit the game-winning jumper. Then last night, they were down to the Knicks early, came back, were up double digits in the second half. Then the Knicks came back and made it close. But Julius Randle got hit with the tech late. He was ejected. Curry hit the free throws, kind of put that game away. And the Warriors finally won on this road trip, 114-106. So they get the cover and they stayed under. And they got revenge for that 119-104 loss to the Knicks in San Francisco back in late January. So the Warriors and Knicks now, they split their two-game season series. But again, these numbers are just, this is the NBA now. 36, 19, 39, 20. The consistency just isn't there with these games. The Boston Celtics, they need to call for help right now because they are not playing well. And they blow this game in New Orleans on Sunday, up 24. They lose in overtime. Dallas last night, this was a back-and-forth game most of the way. Boston took the lead in the final minute. Luka Doncic hit a three-pointer to give Dallas the lead. Boston tied it, and then Luka hit another three to win it, 110-107. So Dallas, off the back-to-back, they beat Memphis and Boston, and the Mavericks, all of a sudden now, they've covered 3 or 4 at home after they went on a terrible stretch at American Airlines Center. They go on the road for a few games now, and they were off for about a week due to, well, not really COVID issues, due to the bad weather in Texas, but Boston has got to get it figured out. Sacramento and Brooklyn was really interesting from this standpoint. So Brooklyn comes in 5-0 straight up and against the spread in their last 5 games on the road trip. Okay, so they beat the Suns, they beat the Lakers, they beat the Clippers. All as a dog. Now they return home against Sacramento, who they beat already on that road trip. Durant's still out. Kyrie and Harden played last night. But yet that number dropped from 7.5, which I thought was low anyway, to 5.5. Harrison Barnes ended up suiting up for Sacramento. He played well. But the Nets were up 14 out of the shoot, scored 72 in the first half. The Kings came back. They cut it to 1. It was like 111, 110, I believe. And then the Nets went on an 11-0 run, and all of a sudden you say, oh, well, there you go. It's over. And the Kings lose by 9. So Sacramento now, that's 0-8 straight up and against the spread. Last time they won a game was against the Clippers back on February 7th. All right? So Sacramento has not won a game. They have not covered a game in this stretch and a bunch of overs. So they are not playing any defense. They're not winning. They're not covering. And they get the Knicks tomorrow night. You got the Knicks and the Pistons coming up. You think maybe they win one of those games. And Brooklyn continues to roll. I mean, they're just so impressive right now. Philadelphia gets a split with Toronto in that little 2-game set in Tampa. They lost the first game 110-103, but win the second one. They were up that whole game. And the final score is a little misleading, 109-102, because Philadelphia was up 15, 17, 20 early. Toronto came back. They cut it in the third quarter to 5 or 6, but then couldn't get any closer. Sixers went back up big. Raptors made it close again. But the Sixers, I'm not going to say a rare road win, but they had struggled on the road. They were 0-4 their last 4 road games. They finally get one there. And now they come home for an interesting homestand. Dallas, Cleveland, they'll be a huge favorite. And also, that's a big revenge spot for the Sixers. They lost by 24 to Cleveland back in late December. Indiana and Utah. So not an easy homestand. That Utah game will be really good March 3rd with the Jazz and the Sixers. Milwaukee now all of a sudden has 3 straight blowout wins since the 5-game losing streak. Oklahoma City, Sacramento, Minnesota, all double-digit favorites for the Bucks. All wins by double digits, by 13, and by 27 last night over the Timberwolves. So I guess the formula for Minnesota or Milwaukee to get back on track, play bad teams. And they played bad teams, and all of a sudden now they're cashing in. Minnesota, I mentioned this yesterday, so I'll put myself out there for this. Since beating Toronto on Valentine's Day, they lost by 8 to the Lakers, 6 to the Pacers, 5 to the Raptors, 4 to the Knicks. Okay, so they've hung around all these games. Now they're getting 10, and they get the doors blown off them. Minnesota has not been really blown out in a while. The last time they lost big was to Philadelphia at the end of January. So this Minnesota team had been competitive. They just hadn't gotten over the hump. Denver comes back to beat Portland in this back and forth game last night as 6-point favorites, 111-106. Much needed win for the Nuggets because they had a terrible road trip. Losing 3 of 4, only win at Cleveland. Doesn't really count. But gave up 130 to the Wizards, 123 to the Hawks, and now they beat Portland. First time they played each other this season. The Blazers get the cover after they were routed by Phoenix 2 nights ago. So on the back-to-back, Portland gets the cover. Portland now 6-2 against the spread their last 8 on the road. That's pretty good. They got the Lakers coming up, and they beat the Lakers at Staples back on December 28th, 115-107. Then they come home for 3. So after Portland gets the Lakers, you have 3 games. You should win at least 2 of those 3 coming back home. And then finally from last night, Washington goes out to L.A. for a second straight night after they beat the Lakers in overtime. 5th straight win, by the way, for the Wizards. They lose to the Clippers by 19. They were getting 12. They hung for a little bit. They made it interesting, but they lose by 19, 135, 116. Probably a little late to jump on that Wizard bandwagon after they won outright as these, I don't say short dogs, but shorter dogs than getting 12 here last night. And the Clippers were obviously very focused as they were coming off that loss to the Nets a few nights ago, and they had been a bit up and down. But as you see here, Clippers up 16 after 1, up 17 at the half. Washington has got this way about them that they have these big quarters sometimes. Other times not, but they get that big quarter once in a while. They just didn't get enough of those, and they gave up 36 in 3 separate quarters. So that's why the Clippers dropped 135 on them. So now let's transition into tonight with the NBA. Golden State, Indiana leads things off, and Golden State, first time they're a dog here on this road trip after they lost to Orlando, lost to Charlotte, beat the Knicks last night. So first time they're a dog in a little bit. And last time they were a dog, they lost to San Antonio, lost to Dallas, won at Dallas. Remember, that was the Kelly Oubre game when he went berserk. And then they lost the second game of that 2-game series in 3 nights. But destroyed at Phoenix, destroyed at Utah. So the Warriors not really great as a road dog of late, but also they're playing with revenge tonight. They lost 104-95 to Indiana back on January 12th at Chase Center. Now, Indiana's been off for a little bit. They had a few games postponed. So they had to go to Houston a few days ago, and that game was knocked off due to the weather in Texas. But Indiana picked up that overtime win against Minnesota last Wednesday, so the Pacers have had some time off. They've won 3 of 4, and you see playing a little better on the road. And this one still baffles me, how they closed as a 1-point favorite at Brooklyn. That one I didn't get, and you saw what happened. They scored 30 points in the first half of that game. But now they got Golden State again, and a road trip that won't be easy. Boston's struggling, but still, again, Celtics are a good team. Knicks have been tough at home. Philly's really good at home. Cleveland stinks. And then you get Denver to close out the first half. And we should find out, hopefully, in the next week or so, the second half schedule for the NBA, because we're still waiting on that one. Houston goes into Cleveland tonight. And the Rockets, you see, they haven't won a game since February the 4th against Memphis. They haven't won a game since before the Super Bowl. That's how long it's been for the Rockets. But they lose by 20 to the Bulls a few nights ago, and the offense is very shaky. They've had injuries. DeMarcus Cousins is probably on his way out. Christian Wood's been out for a little bit, he's been their most valuable player this year, and since he's been out, they really haven't failed to find ways to score. So Cleveland, meanwhile, off that win last night, a very rare win for them. What has Cleveland done off a win recently? Gave up 141 to Boston, gave up 102 to the Knicks, gave up 121 to the Clippers. So they've been, look at this, 38, 21, 22 is what they've lost by the last 3 games off a win for Cleveland. So see how that one turns out. Houston really has struggled. Cleveland struggled. But Cleveland has a little bit of momentum. Not a lot, but a little bit of momentum. So Cleveland beat Atlanta last night. The Hawks back home. They face the Celtics. And this is the 3rd time they're playing in a week. Atlanta split the 2 games with Boston last week at TD Garden. They caught the Celtics off no rest and the Denver win to beat them 122-114 last Wednesday, but then they lost last Friday, 121-109. Also, Kemba Walker didn't play in that first game. And Atlanta back at home here as a dog. They beat Denver, lost to Indiana, beat Toronto, lost to Utah, but Trae Young didn't play in that game, lost to Dallas, lost to the Lakers, lost to Brooklyn, but covered. I mean, so Atlanta's not really a great home underdog. But Boston, though, look at what they've done as a road favorite. The two losses, New Orleans and Dallas, lost to Washington by 13, beat Golden State here, beat Chicago, lost to San Antonio. So, again, I still don't know what's wrong with Boston right now. You know, I mean, Kemba's been really up and down with his shooting, and maybe the loss of Marcus Smart. I mean, people, forget about him. That Marcus Smart's been out for a bit, and that's a big deal not having him in the lineup. San Antonio hasn't played in a while. They are at Oklahoma City tonight, and the Spurs have been off since February 14th, winning at Charlotte. And they had COVID issues, so now the Spurs are going to have to make up a few games. But look at San Antonio. They've won 5 of 6. All of a sudden, they're playing well. And, again, it's the coming off of the COVID stop, how good are you going to be? And not to disrespect Oklahoma City, but I guess I will since I'm saying it. It's a no offense, but you're ugly. That if you're going to come back from COVID, you face Oklahoma City. That you're not facing Dallas, you're not facing the Lakers, you're not facing the Clippers, you face Oklahoma City. And they beat Oklahoma City earlier in the year 112-102 at Chesapeake Energy Arena back on January the 12th. So now they get the Thunder again. And the Spurs a short favorite here. The Thunder off the loss to the Heat a few nights ago. And, I mean, Oklahoma City just has not been good at home this year. Simple as that. They did upset Milwaukee, but lost to Portland, split with Minnesota, split with Houston, lost by 22 to Brooklyn, beat Chicago in overtime. In that game, they should have lost. Spurs and Lakers lost. They lost these 3 up here. So, yeah, they beat Milwaukee, but I'm not going to throw them a parade. They're 4-10 at home this year, the Thunder. Chicago tries to stay hot. They get Minnesota tonight. You call this the Tom Thibodeau Bowl, but he's not coaching. He's with the Knicks. But the Bulls have won 4 of 5. They're playing actually really well. And Billy Donovan, considering he's a guy that left the University of Florida, won 2 national championships, went to Oklahoma City where he had Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant, took him to the Western Conference Finals, eventually had Paul George, had Chris Paul. They had superstars there, and they couldn't get over the hump. But even losing some of those stars over the years, they still were a pretty good team. And even last year, getting Chris Paul, they still went to the playoffs, and they lost to Houston in the first round in 7 games. So he goes to Chicago, and the Bulls just don't have near the talent that Oklahoma City had. They have Zach LaVine. They have Lauri Markkanen. They have Kobe White out of North Carolina. There's some talent there, but they're a lottery team. Didn't start off so hot. They played better, and Billy's a good coach, and going to a team like Chicago who is not winning the Central. They're probably the 3rd best team if you're lucky behind Milwaukee and Indiana in that division because obviously Detroit and Cleveland are non-factors. But he's done a good job with them. They've won 4 of 5. And I get Detroit, Sacramento, Houston, not great competition. That's a good win at Indiana in overtime. They beat Orlando. They beat New Orleans. But as a home favorite, though, they were down 25 to Detroit and came back and won that game. They lost to Washington, split with the Knicks, lost to Portland in that Damian Lillard 3 at the buzzer. So not a great home favorite. Now you get Minnesota, who I mentioned before, had hung around a lot of games. Yeah, they were blown out by Milwaukee. Milwaukee's obviously in a different class than them. But first time Minnesota and Chicago playing this year. We'll see if the Timberwolves can win a game. Well, 1 win they have. 2 wins they have this month. 2. Oklahoma City and Toronto. And that's it. Minnesota, it's not a good team. That's why they fired their coach. Detroit and New Orleans, they just played actually at Little Caesars Arena back on Valentine's Day, and the Pistons end up winning that one 123-112. Big win the other day for the Pelicans when they came back to beat the Celtics 120-115. But look at all these overs, though. Just a ton of overs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 overs. 8 straight overs for the Pelicans. You know why? Because they don't play defense. All right? They have offensive weapons. Zion's played really well. Brandon Ingram's still really good. Lonzo Ball turned out to be a pretty good acquisition in the Anthony Davis trade, and I get you'd rather have Anthony Davis than Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram, but both those guys have turned out to be good players. So now they got Detroit in a revenge game, and they've been terrible as a home favorite, losing to Portland, beat Houston, big deal. They lost to Sacramento, beat Washington, but again, Hornets lost, Thunder lost, Pacers lost, Spurs non-cover. I feel like I always do that with this show. Talk about New Orleans. I got to hit it home that they're not a good home favorite. Charlotte goes to Phoenix tonight, and the Suns, they've won 3 straight. They're putting up great offensive numbers. Look at that, 132, 128, 132. The Suns are scoring at will right now. They face Charlotte, and the Hornets were actually up 11 on Utah the other night, but then Utah went on a crazy 3-point barrage in the fourth quarter. So 132-110 was the final of that game. And you see this road trip for the Hornets where, look, could they beat Phoenix? They could beat them. It's not crazy. But Phoenix, Golden State, Sacramento, Portland, Minnesota, you can go 3-3. You're kind of lucky if you're the Hornets. But Charlotte's last few games on the road, take a look at this. Over against Utah, over against Memphis, over against the Heat, split an over and an under against Orlando, over against Toronto twice, over against New Orleans. So this Charlotte team on a nice overrun on the road of late. So keep an eye on that with tonight's game and that total of 224.5 between the Suns and the Hornets. And now we get to the big game of the NBA tonight. Lakers and the Jazz. Man, this one is extremely tough. So Anthony Davis still out for the Lakers. And they go to Utah tonight, take on the Jazz, who are right now the best team in basketball. It's not the Lakers. It's not the Clippers. You could argue maybe the Nets, but Utah, over the longer sample size, is the best team right now in the NBA. The Nets, when they get Durant back, we can have that conversation later, but right now it's got to be Utah. Let's first look at the Lakers. They've lost 4 or 5. They won at Minnesota. So really no big deal there. But they lose in overtime to Washington. They had a couple overtime wins there. I mean, man, they went to overtime with some substandard competition, Detroit and Oklahoma City twice. Now you go to Utah, where they have not played Utah yet this season. And the Jazz, they should be laying 9 because they've been that good. That they have lost 2 games since January 6th. Since losing to the Knicks on January 6th, they've lost 2 games. To the Nuggets and to the Clippers. That's it. They're winning all of them. And on the road, they've been great at home. The last time they've lost a home game was in 2020 against the Suns. And somehow, inexplicably, they lost to Minnesota. This one, I don't understand how that one happens. But this Utah team laying 9, but look, they're laying big numbers. 12.5 cover, 8.5 cover, 8.5 cover, 10 cover, 12 push, 11 cover, 7, 6.5, 6.5, 12.5, 8.5. So Quinn Snyder's team, since starting not so great here as a favorite, Quinn Snyder's team is not afraid to lay big numbers and cover them. So if you're going to take Utah tonight, don't be afraid to lay the 9. And I know you're not getting LeBron as this heavy of a dog normally, but there's got to be a reason why Utah's laying 9. And I know the Lakers not played well, but you see this? The side, money, all in the Lakers. And yet, when you take a look at our line movements, see? 8, 8.5, 9. 8, 8.5, 9. 8.5, 8, 9. It's moving up on Utah's side. So that's the look at the NBA. Don't forget about our buy picks page, too, if you want to find our handicappers and who has done well so far. Michael Roberts, he is our leader in the clubhouse right now for the NBA, MIT Simulator as well, performing well. Alex Smart's got a nice little run. He's got 3 plays tonight. Mike has got 4 plays. So check that out on our experts page. on VegasInsider.com. Now for college basketball. I'll take a quick look back at last night before we look ahead to tonight in college hoops. And a crazy finish here. VCU beats St. Louis 67-65 inside the Atlantic 10. So St. Louis really has not played well over the last few games, losing to Dayton and VCU on the road. Now they get Richmond coming up. That'll be a big game. And they had that Richmond game postponed earlier, like an hour before the game back last month. But the Billikens of St. Louis, for the exception of beating St. Bonaventure, really not a lot of impressive wins in A-10 play. How about Michigan State? You always can expect Tom Izzo to come up with that win that you don't expect from them. And they all of a sudden have won 2 straight. So the Spartans, who had been so bad in Big Ten play, they had a good start to the season, lost to Northwestern. They were 0-3 in the Big Ten. And then they lose by 30 to Iowa, lose at Purdue. All of a sudden now, Indiana, Illinois, back-to-back wins as an underdog. Then they get Ohio State. They get Michigan a couple times towards the end. We still haven't seen that Spartan-Wolverine matchup. But that, a good win for Tom Izzo. For Illinois is still very difficult to figure out. And yes, they went on this long winning streak. But losing to Maryland as a 10.5-point home favorite. They struggled with Northwestern last week. They blew out Minnesota. You don't know which team you're getting. They struggled at Nebraska. You're just not sure with Illinois. So Illinois is either going to go to the Final Four or flame out in the round of 32. West Virginia, they continue to stay hot. They held off TCU last night, 74-66. West Virginia is pretty much in control of this whole game. And now they're 2 for 2 in Texas. They go to Baylor tomorrow night, and they play Baylor again next week. So all of a sudden now, West Virginia, who, I mean, look at Bob Huggins. I mean, he's still a great coach. But they've taken the first 2 games here. This was a huge letdown spot for West Virginia, but they come out and win against TCU, a team that really hasn't been that good this year. How about LSU? That's another team we can't figure out. That LSU, who started off in SEC play pretty well, lost that game to Florida, 5-1 out of the gate. Lose by 30 at home to Alabama. Lose by 13 to a Kentucky team that's down. They came back in that, or they blew the Texas Tech game at the end. Remember that in the SEC Big 12 Challenge? That they were up big, and then Texas Tech won on that 11-0 run in the final minute. But lose here to Alabama. Good win at Mississippi State. Convincing win. They drop 104 in Auburn, and then lose to Georgia. Georgia has actually... One thing I give Tom Crean, it's not a great record, but they have been very competitive. 6-2 against the spread the last 8. And they got South Carolina coming up. That's a game they're definitely going to lose, right? Like, Georgia's losing that game to South Carolina because they beat LSU. It's just going to happen. In the ACC last night, Georgia Tech won at Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech was actually off for a little bit due to Carolina had the COVID issues there. But they had been off for 17 days. I'm telling you, in college basketball, for the most part, it's not 100%. But these teams that have long layoffs, somewhat long layoffs, 2 weeks at least, or more, they just don't play well. They do not respond in the first game back. And that's what happened with Virginia Tech. They lose to Georgia Tech by 16. They score 53 points. Georgia Tech scored 55 against Penn State. That's the least amount of points they had scored before last night, so 53. And for Georgia Tech, now they've won 3 straight. They're not a tournament team, but Josh Pastner's done a good job. Louisville has done a good job of bouncing back after the bad loss, after the COVID break. See what I'm saying? Beat Western Kentucky off for 18 days, and they face Wisconsin. Wisconsin blows the doors off them. Then they play Pitt a few days later, win by 10. Same thing here. After they played Georgia Tech on the first, won by 16, played North Carolina, lost by 35. Then they go play Notre Dame, win by 12. So good job by Louisville. And for Notre Dame, hangover from the Syracuse loss. They were up 20 at Syracuse, and they ended up losing that game. So you wonder if Notre Dame just totally wasn't focused last night. Villanova beat St. John's. That was kind of a never-in-doubt game, 81-58, and that was a revenge spot. St. John's beat Villanova 70-59 in Queens back last month. So now Villanova, they've bounced back. What's funny about Villanova is since this little stretch here, they've won a few in a row, lost. So now you kind of wonder what Villanova will do. This is the big boy here, this Creighton game. Revenge spot for Jay Wright's team. I mean, Butler, they should beat Butler. They're not very good. This game was as intriguing as it gets. Baylor was down double digits in the first half to Iowa State, laying 23.5. And Baylor actually came back and won 77-72, so they don't cover the 23.5. But what do we see here? What's the common trend? Last game against Texas, February 2nd. Baylor was off for 3 weeks, laying 23.5. They barely beat Iowa State, who was the worst team in the Big 12. So, again, I think we're a little late to the party now if there's any more teams with COVID issues. And we don't know what's going to happen next season. But that has been the trend. You're coming off of a big layoff. You don't play well. And Baylor just got by Iowa State. They have West Virginia, Kansas, West Virginia. They got big teams ahead of them. Maybe they weren't focused, but Iowa State almost pulled a huge upset in that game last night. Also, well, speaking of huge upsets, Kansas State, that's a really good win for them, beating Oklahoma. Oklahoma's really struggled at Bramlage Coliseum over the years. And for K-State, when you look at what they've done, there was somebody put on Twitter, they're the first team since, I believe, Wake Forest in the early 90s to lose to a Division II school, Fort Hays State, but beat a top 10 team, Oklahoma, in the same season. And all of a sudden, let me go back to K-State for 1 second. So they beat TCU and Oklahoma. So they have a nice little finish here after they had a long losing streak. And Oklahoma, they had been playing well, but losing to Texas Tech on the road, that game they shouldn't have covered. I remember I had Texas Tech in that game. They had no business covering that game. Their offense just dries up at times. Look at these losses. 61-59, 52-57. Now you get Oklahoma State. You get the Bedlam basketball version coming up, and then Texas. So Oklahoma, again, laying a lot of points towards the end of the season against a team that's got nothing to lose. Oklahoma did themselves in. Florida ends up beating Auburn 74-57. And the Gators, that's a really solid road victory for them, as all of a sudden now they've won a couple in a row. And layoff. 3rd to the 16th. See, now they get Kentucky coming up next. Ole Miss ends up winning at Missouri. They beat Missouri for a second time. And Ole Miss now, they bounce back from that Mississippi State loss where they were just down the whole game. But second time they beat Missouri. Held Missouri to 59-53. Quanzo Martin's team, not so hot right now. They got off to a good start this season. So they beat Oregon, beat a good Wichita State team, beat Illinois. But look at the stretch for Missouri. And the only one coming at South Carolina was really not a good team. And to wrap up last night's college basketball, Texas rallies past Kansas in overtime. This was a really good game. Kansas was in control. Texas ends up taking the lead late. Kansas tied it. Texas didn't score in the final, I think, 3 minutes of regulation of that game. But then Texas ends up winning 75-72. They've been so inconsistent of late, but they really needed that win after they lost to West Virginia, blowing that big lead on Saturday and losing Oklahoma State in overtime. They just hadn't been great, and they weren't great against the spread at home this season. Kansas, I mentioned this yesterday, Kansas on the road since beating Texas Tech against quality teams, not TCU or these other teams at the bottom, Iowa State and Kansas State. Lose to Oklahoma State, lose to Baylor, lose to Oklahoma, lose to Tennessee, lose to West Virginia. Against good teams, Kansas has struggled on the road. So we'll see what they do moving forward, or at least when the tournament hits, assuming they go to the tournament. I think they go to the tournament. Let's look at Wednesday. And games coming up. tonight, NC State and Virginia. Virginia coming off back-to-back losses on the road to Duke and FSU. So now they're laying 11. They failed to cover against Pitt and Wake Forest as heavy home favorites. And NC State's won a few in a row on the road. What else do we have? Seton Hall and Butler in the Big East. And Seton Hall losing to Georgetown a few days ago. So that one kind of question. They didn't cover in this game against Butler. They were laying 9. They won by 8. So now they go on the road. And Butler had a few guys dinged up in the loss to Xavier. Butler hung in that Xavier game. The final score is misleading. They lost by 12, but they were down 2 at the half. They were there down 4 or 5 in the final few minutes, and then Xavier kind of opened it up. But Butler obviously just not a good team. Now this is really intriguing. Marquette in North Carolina. You're getting a non-conference game this late in the season, and UNC just beat Northeastern, and now the Tar Heels are trying to make up some games here. And they beat Northeastern last week. They blew out Louisville. Now they get Marquette before Florida State comes into Chapel Hill this weekend. But all of a sudden, North Carolina, North Carolina is one of those blue bloods that was taking a lot of crap this year. Maybe not as much as Kentucky or Duke or Michigan State or even Kansas at one point, but they actually haven't been that bad when you look back at what they've done recently, losing to Virginia, losing to Clemson. There's nothing to be ashamed of in those games, but they're playing better. And now you get Marquette, who ended up beating Butler a few days ago. Look at this stretch of road games for Woj. And they snapped a 3-game skid. Marquette's still not a bad team. They jump out to these big leads, and they can't hold them. That's been one of their big issues this year. But also, you can't lose to DePaul at home. They lose that game. They were down early to St. John's and couldn't really pick that one up. They hung with Creighton. Villanova whacked them, and then they hung with Seton Hall. So Carolina laid 9.5 in that game. FSU goes to Miami, and Miami's just been they're so decimated by injuries. And you look at some of these losses they've had. I mean, yeah, they upset Duke at home, but besides that, they're not scoring. And it's going to be an ugly ending for them. And Florida State laying 11.5 now on the road. They have 2 ACC losses, both on the road at Clemson and at Georgia Tech, and really not a lot. When you look at the schedule, they're going to have, a lot of road games to close out. They won at Pitt a few days ago, but not a lot of road games for FSU so far in the season. This is the big one in the SEC, Alabama and Arkansas. And this revenge game for Arkansas, in which they lost 90-59 in Tuscaloosa back in mid-January. That was on the heels of losing by 16 at LSU. So since then, they haven't lost an SEC game. They've won 7 straight. This was the Big 12 SEC Challenge against Oklahoma State. So they've won 7 straight inside the conference, and they have been off for 8 days. So you wonder now, 8 days, not crazy. That's not 2 weeks, but 8 days they've been off, and now they get Alabama, who ripped them the first time. Alabama's trying to get a number 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. Alabama, after having some struggles here, losing to Oklahoma and Missouri on the road, they barely beat South Carolina. Coming off 2 wins against Georgia and Vandy aren't, that's something to get excited about. They don't cover against Vandy, but here, okay, Arkansas is a dog on the road. 1 at Kentucky, 1 outright at Tennessee. So you have a couple games there. And LSU, they open as a dog. They close this short favor, 1 by 30. Really tough game to handicap, Arkansas and Alabama. Also got Tennessee and Vandy coming up. Now the tables have turned. Tennessee's laying 8 to Vandy. You would have thought there would have been way more when this season, or at least earlier in the season. Looking at the NHL tonight, you have 7 games. Calgary and Toronto, one of the top matchups. LA and St. Louis. LA, they continue to play well. They've won 5 straight. They shut out the Blues 2 nights ago. Panthers and the Stars, second of their 3 games. They're playing in a 4-day span. The Panthers beat the Stars 3-1 on Monday, Tampa Bay and Carolina again. Tampa Bay finally beat Carolina a few nights ago. Flyers and the Rangers in Philadelphia. And you see the Flyers have not been so hot of late, losing 4 of their past 5. And the Rangers, they've all of a sudden won 2 in a row after a 4-game skid. And they're scoring some goals here after they had some issues early on. So that is the look of what we have in everything so far in the sports world on this Wednesday, February 24th. So if you want to catch the Daily Insider, you can find it on our homepage right here, the basketball, with myself, Kevin Rogers. If you miss any of the show, you can watch the replay. It is on our YouTube channel at Vegas Insider. Also, you can check out some of our top handicappers, Greg Smith. In college hoops, Scott Pritchard, the guaranteed leader in college hoops. He just kills it, mostly in totals. And you can check out Scott's pick for tonight inside of college basketball. Also, if you want to look at this too, bracketology update. You can see our latest bracketology and where these teams are going to be slotted, obviously subject to change every day with the way things go. But you can check this out too, our March Madness bracketology. And you can find that on our homepage with the big bracket. So that is the look of everything going on. I am Kevin Rogers. We appreciate you listening and watching the Daily Insider here on VegasInsider.com. And, of course, you can find us all the time on Twitter at TwitVI. And we will talk to you again tomorrow on the Daily Insider right here on VegasInsider.com.